we are live with Daniel Otykier. Hey, thank you guys all for signing in and joining us today on Kratos BI with Daniel Otykier. We're going to be talking about Tabular Editor 3. It's one of my absolute favorite tools for working with Power BI. But before that, you know, I just got a really quick little plug. So hold on one second. Yo, what's up? I know what you're doing. You're sitting there watching YouTube. Here's what you gotta do. Hit the like, subscribe, you know, turn on the alarm bell, leave a comment, all that good stuff. All right, man? All right. We'll see you around. All right. Hey, Daniel, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Chris. I'm doing great. Great to be here. I always enjoy these live sessions. It's just amazing to have the opportunity to get in touch with people in real time in the community. It's fantastic.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for hopping in. So I come from like the old school enterprise BI space, right? We spun up our tabular models. We installed SQL Server Desktop Studio, SSDT, and we built and managed our models using that tool, right? And it was a challenge, right? Because that was not a small install, failed all the time, had lots of issues when like one developer on your team had the wrong version, or God forbid someone upgraded before you had blessed it, and now everyone's in a scramble. There were challenges, right?
Yes.
And when we talk about managing an enterprise code base and enterprise developers, that's a big deal because downtime, it means a lot when it comes to working with your developers and you know, all these different teams you're trying to coordinate. But you had a similar problem, and you did something about it. Instead of just whining, like I just whined and complained, right? Like, you know, like, rant about Microsoft, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
You said, I'm going to do something about this.
Yes.
Tell everyone, what is it that you did here?
So you know, it all started back in 2016 when I was doing exactly the scenario that you were mentioning. And one more thing regarding, you know, enterprise models is these are not like small models with 3, 4, or 5 tables. I mean, real life enterprise models are big, complex. They have a lot of tables. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of measures. And you know, back in the days, we had to manage all of that using the standard tools, which were basically based off Power Pivot for Excel, and it just wasn't suited to work with models that had that kind of complexity and size. And one day, you know, I got this request from a customer. I was working on a model that had maybe 100 tables, maybe 800 measures or so. And they wanted, you know, from their perspective, they just wanted a minor change. They wanted a display folder to be renamed. And within this display folder, there were like this deeply nested structure. I think there was like 600 measures or so within this one display folder. And so the customer said to me, hey, could you rename this display folder? We needed we needed a different name for it. And I said, sure. But then when I started looking at it, you know, I had to go, you know, through each individual measure within that display folder in order to rename it. So going back to the customer,
it wasn't just individual measure. For those of you who do not remember those days, it was select a measure, pull up the field, paste in the folder path that you had, and then you had to wait. Well, I don't know what SSDT did during that 45 seconds or so for each field, but like at a minimum, it was a 45-second pause to put in a folder, right? And exactly. You said, heck no, right? You said, to heck with this. I'm not spending my life like this. You've solved it. What? Okay, keep going. I love this story. Please keep going.
And you know, I actually told the customer that this was going to take them like 14 days to make this one change to the model. So I figured that had to be a better way. Like, I mean, this couldn't be real. So the first thing I actually tried was, you know, just to open the model metadata, the model.bim file in the text editor, since it was just a JSON file.
Sure.
I thought, hey, maybe I can just do some search and replace kind of stuff through the text file. But it turned out that the name that had to be changed was actually quite a common word I don't remember the exact word, but maybe something like sales or revenue or something, and you'd encounter that word all across the JSON file. So doing a search and replace would obviously be dangerous,
Right.
since you might have broken other things. And I thought, hey, I know I can do some C# coding. I've done some C# programming in my spare time before. So let me write just a small application that can load this JSON file, show the display folders in a hierarchical structure, and then apply the rename. And it took me maybe 2-3 hours to write this small program. And then once I had it, I could make this change across all 600 meshes in like a few seconds, right? Because I was just loading a big JSON document, making some changes to it programmatically, and then saving it again. So no big deal. And that's when it hit me, why stop there? Why only use this tool for editing display folders? And that's basically the story of how Tabular Editor started.
Oh, that is just so fantastic on a number of fronts here, right? Number one, you saw an issue and you decided to do something about it, and not just whine like I did. And frankly, all of the other enterprise BI developers did, right? So thank you. We owe you a debt of gratitude. So thank you very much. But also that, those old school like C# skills and abilities that we learned a long time ago but haven't touched in forever, right? That still has significant value today. So I guess you're saying I made a mistake when I threw out my C# books a couple years ago, huh?
Yeah, but I mean, at least Tabular Editor now provides you with an opportunity to to make use of some of those skills once again. As you know, Tabular Editor has the C# scripting engine built in, so you can actually use C# within Tabular Editor to automate some of the. So even though Tabular Editor makes you more productive in terms like renaming a display folder that impacts 600 meshes, there are still cases where it would be advantageous to be able to automate things. And that's where the C# stuff comes in handy. It's basically like macros, VBA in the Office applications, Excel, Word, and so on, that are also used to automate things. It's the same thing basically, but with tabular models and with C#.
Fantastic. So let's play a little bit of role playing. I'll be devil's advocate here, and I'm going to play the classical IT admin or IT leadership. Like, hey, we have SSDT. Microsoft's SSDT is the official tool that you use, right? Like, we buy it from Microsoft, we pay for our .NET subscription, right? SSDT's there to manage and model our tabular models. Why should we be looking at using Tabular Editor 3 in our enterprise, right? Like, we have it all of our models are in Git, it's all in code check, we've got audit needs and trace requirements. Like, why should we be looking at Tabular Editor 3?
Yeah. So I'm really glad to get this question, to be honest, because it allows me to really showcase the many benefits of Tabular Editor 3. So the thing that I usually tell people is that at a minimum you should be using the free version of Tabular Editor, because already there, for the reason I mentioned previously, but also just for the fact that Tabular Editor uses this offline architecture where it's not synchronizing the analysis services database every time you make a change. So already there you gain so much in terms of productivity, especially when you're working on complex enterprise models. So there's just no excuse not to use at least the free version Tabular Editor 2. Now, Tabular Editor 3, on the other hand, is interesting because it offers a lot of, I would call them like premium features, which just in general make your life easier. Our goal is to sort of combine all the features you need into one single tool. So instead of you having to switch back and forth between many different tools like DAX Studio for querying the model, SSMS for refreshing, managing partitions, and so on, and of course SSDT for developing the actual model. We have all of those capabilities inside a single tool. Many people would probably also use something like Excel or Power BI, the Power BI desktop client, for testing the model, being able to drag measures into a matrix or pivot table. But Tabular Editor 3 now also has these capabilities. And then last but not least, of course, there's the productivity features I mentioned earlier, the scripting, which is just much better in Tabular Editor 3. We have a better intelligence when you're typing C# code. It helps you a lot. It's basically as if you're sitting in Visual Studio and typing C# code. So there's a lot going on there to basically make you more productive. Oh, and then the one feature that Tabular Editor 3 has that you won't find in any of the other tools I mentioned is our DAX Debugger, which is a feature we released back in January that allows you to step into a complex DAX expression and basically look at it line by line, function call by function call, and see what it's doing, evaluating intermediate calculations and so on. And no other tool out there today lets you do that. So if you're sometimes struggling with getting your DAX calculations to return the right results, then that tool is just, it's invaluable. It's just a must-have.
That is so true. So the next question that I always see and I hear from lots of people is like, okay, and I think you answered it great. Like, why should you invest your time and money? It's because you'll get it back 1,000-fold in productivity and happy developers, right? And in fact, I used to say that, like, hey, you should come work with me because I've got Tabular Editor 3 to attract people to work with me. But now I've started to run into like, well, yeah, they already have Tabular Editor 3, so like now it's a minimum, an MVP for hiring someone is they want to make sure that they have this tool available to them already. Like, okay, so that's great. So you've already established that you're the standard that developers want to have. So that's awesome. The next question I have is, how do you get? What challenges, if any, do companies have in getting a third-party tool like Tabular Editor 3 pass through security? And what do you tell security teams or evaluations to ensure that what's happening, that Tabular Editor 3 is on the up and up?
Yeah, that's a really good question also, and in fact the funny thing is that since we've gone over to a commercial offering rather than an open source offering, we've actually seen that it seems to be easier, especially for large IT organizations, to get this approved. Getting in touch with the procurement team and so on, filling out documents and so on. It's just easier when you have an actual vendor who has a product that they're selling, and there's some kind of liability as well. There's some certifications and various documents instead of just throwing some software out there on GitHub with an MIT license. I know at least a lot of IT organizations, they are a bit hesitant to pick that up. So we've actually seen greater uptake on companies that would be hesitant to use the open source version, have actually had an easier time picking up Tabular Editor 3 since we can offer this kind of support and liability. If there are any of these questions in your organizations and you have IT people who would like to know about stuff like privacy and security and so on, we actually have a document on our website that describes in detail how, so what kind of out and all of the stuff relating to security and privacy.
Fantastic. So you froze for a second, but I think I heard you, so I'm going to restate what you said for everyone. There's out on your website, there's a document that runs through all the security that can help get this passed, right? Yeah. So in general, whenever we get a request from some IT procurement department, we usually just link them this document, and in like 95% of the cases, that's enough to get the product approved. Fantastic. And to my audience, some of you may know this, but if you just tell your procurement and security team that it's Chris Wagner approved, I don't know why, but it actually works on a semi-regular basis. So there's some sort of like abracadabra-ness with that. So use it wisely. You don't want to, like curse it or anything like that. But that does help. So
yeah,
that's fantastic.
I talked a lot about the features that set Tabular Editor 3 aside, but I think it's also worth mentioning that because it is a commercial model, we do have a team that are offering 24/7 support. That stuff also seems to be a big driver for onboarding people on Tabular Editor 3. Whereas with the open source version, we offer what we call community support, meaning that if you have a question, you'll need to post a description of your issue in public on GitHub, and then we'll answer it on a best effort basis. I mean, that's sort of the deal with community support, right? And we also encourage the community to contribute to that. But with Tabular Editor 3 Enterprise Edition, we can offer this dedicated support to our enterprise customers, where we are available 24/7 for technical questions, helping with bugs and whatnot. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, I just see someone has stepped into the studio. Oh, hang on. He wants to say hello. Hey, Daniel, welcome to the live stream. How you doing, buddy? I hope you're doing good. How's your mother? Yeah. Hey, Les, how's it going? Les, did you have a question for Daniel? All right, Daniel, I got a question for you. We're talking about enterprise data model management. Here's my question. I got all these freaking models out there. If I want to change a measure in one model, I go to all these other models and refresh that measure, adjust it, make sure that I change it in all these different places. Is there any better way to manage all of these enterprise models so I can do it with one code base? Huh? All right, okay, Les, that's a fantastic question. So, Daniel, how can you better manage multiple models with Tabular Editor 3?
Yeah, great question, Les. I mean, this is not an uncommon scenario in an enterprise setting. It's very, very common, to work with many different models with overlapping areas, and especially, with measures and maybe dimensions that are shared across all of these models. And in fact, a while ago, I worked with Michael Kowalski. Today, he's with the Power BI CAT team. And we came up with something called the master model pattern, which is basically a C# scripting pattern you can use with either version of Tabular Editor to basically have like a master model that encompasses all of your shared logic. And then you can use the scripting feature to distribute the shared logic out into the individual models that need to reuse the logic. So that could be like having measures, for example, defined in a single place. And then when it's time to deploy maybe 10, 15 different models, then this technique lets you basically replicate the code out among the different models. So I highly recommend looking into that. I think if you just search online for Tabular Editor Master Model Pattern, it should probably appear on, I think Michael has a great blog post where he goes into this in more details.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you're saying I can manage my master model in one place and then distribute that model out to all sorts of other little places, and then just have that code just be kept in sync all over the place?
Yeah. The basic principle is that we're utilizing a feature of analysis services called perspectives, where you can. So a perspective is like a view of a model,
okay,
where you can pick like certain objects, tables, columns, measures that will appear within that perspective, and then within your master model, you're defining a set of perspectives which will end up as individual models when you run the script. So if you have like 10 different models, which are all different subsets of the same master model, then you define that within the perspectives so that you have all of your code in one single place. You won't have to have any redundant code that's replicated across different models. You just keep everything in one single model, use the perspectives to define what goes where, and then you run the script and it spits out the 10 different models that have their different subsets.
Oh, that's brilliant. Hey, Les, great question. Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate you stopping by the studio. All right, so Daniel, I know that today you just kicked off a brand new release of Tabular Editor 3, where you got a whole slew of new features, functionalities that I guess you can show on this live stream today?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Nothing would make me happier.
Oh, and while you're flipping over to that, we have one question from Juan. He said he recently used Tabular Editor to make a slight change to a dataset hosted in Power BI service, but he rendered the dataset so that he could no longer download it. Why is that?
Yeah, so that's an unfortunate limitation right now on the Power BI service, where as soon as you use the XMLA endpoint to make changes to a dataset, Microsoft will flag that dataset as being non-downloadable, and you can no longer turn it into a PBIX file. There are some unofficial workarounds, to my knowledge, that can actually help you. But the truth is that it's just a limitation currently in the Power BI service. So you have to be aware of this limitation before you connect Tabular Editor to a Power BI dataset, obviously, because it's obviously a bit annoying if you're expecting that you'll be able to download the PBIX file afterwards. I think that the technical reason has something to do with, there are some things that Power BI Desktop doesn't support that you can actually do in Tabular Editor. For example, you can add multiple partitions to a table without using incremental refresh policy. And I don't think Power BI Desktop has any way to display if a table has more than the one standard partition than it should have. So you can easily bring the dataset into a state where it can't really be represented in Power BI Desktop. So I think that's why we have this limitation for now. But I believe that Microsoft are working on addressing this without being able to provide a timeline. I think the vision is that in the future it should just work.
Yeah. And Daniel, I think you are right. I too, and Juan said it should work. Juan, you are 100% right. It should just work. This shouldn't be a big thing. And I know most everyone at Microsoft agrees. They're just trying to address the technical limitation that Daniel's describing here. As soon as that is addressed in one of these versions of Power BI Desktop, is my belief, we are going to see an announcement that will come with it that says, hey, in the September or October or whatever it is edition of Power BI Desktop, you can now download a dataset you've been adjusted with an XMLA endpoint. So,
yeah. I think the term Microsoft is using to cover this is desktop hardening. So if you ever heard them use that term in the wild, that is what they're referring to there, among other things.
Yep. Awesome. All right, well, let's head over to your desktop and let's see this puppy.
Awesome. Yeah, so actually one of the very first things that you may notice if you download the new version is that we've kind of rebranded things a little bit. And this also is because we launched a new website today, actually, where we're using this new brand. So let me just do a quick show. By the way, notice we also purchased the te3.com domain, so that's also kind of nice. So this is how our new website looks. We have this new brand, a new logo compared to what we used earlier. And if you happen to be at the Data Insights Summit conference next week in Chicago, where we will be sponsoring, we actually have some swag like T-shirts and stickers and stuff like that we're happy to distribute to you folks. So if you would like to run around with a Tabular Editor logo on your back, then that's a great opportunity for that.
Well, I'm going to be there in Chicago. I can't wait to connect.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's the rebranding, and then of course there are a couple of new features as well as usual with these monthly updates. So in this release, the updates have mostly focused on improving the usability and stability of our DAX debugger that I mentioned earlier. Because in previous versions there were some limitations to the types of queries that you were able to debug. So just let me try to demonstrate what this is all about. So here I have a Power BI desktop model. I think this is one of the famous PBIX files created by the SQL BI team for showing some of their DAX patterns. The way you typically use the debugger is if you have like a matrix or a table in Power BI, like the one I have here, and maybe one of these figures is giving an incorrect result and you're not really understanding why you're seeing that figure. Well, then the idea is that you can use the performance analyzer in Power BI Desktop to refresh the matrix here in this case, get a hold of the DAX query that Power BI Desktop executes to get the values, and then you can go over to Tabular Editor, connect to that instance of Power BI Desktop, and then just paste in the query. So here's the query generated by Power BI Desktop, and then you can hit F5 to run the query, and you'll see the same figures that we just saw in Power BI Desktop a moment ago. And now the debugger feature that we have in Tabular Editor 3 now allows you to click on one of these cells, to right click, and you'll have this debug cell option. So when I click here, what happens is that Tabular Editor goes into debugger mode, where it will actually jump into the DAX code that is being executed. It'll pre-populate the filter context. You can view the entire evaluation context down here. So we can see that right now we have a filter on like fiscal year, quarter, fiscal month, fiscal year, and so on. And then we can step into the code, so we can go down through the entire call tree here, down through the individual measures and calculations, and view the intermediate results and see what's going on to better understand our calculation. So we've made some improvements to this feature. For example, you can now navigate. So let's say I'm interested in this measure, the sales PMTD measure, and I'm actually interested in going to this step of the calculation here where I have my calculate. So instead of trying to locate that particular line of code in this call tree, which could be a pretty complex call tree depending on the complexity of the measures, you can now actually just right click on the expression, and then there's a shortcut here to step into selection. So if I choose that, in this case we get this little dialog asking us how do we want to get to that, and the reason we get this is because we actually have more than one measure in our expression here. So we have both the sales MOMTD and the sales PMTD. And the thing is, the sales PMTD measure is also being referenced inside the sales MOMTD. So there are actually two ways to get to this expression in the calculation. So that's why we saw the little dialog here appearing. But if we choose one of these and hit OK, you see that the cursor now jumps to this part of the calculation. Here we can see the values of the variables that were defined here, last month selected days and last months, etc. We get all of these values out here, and we can even, if we want to evaluate some other expression within this context, we can just type the expression here. So if we wanted to know how many rows are there in our date table in this filter context, we just type that expression out here. It returns the value right there. And we can even take a closer look at those rows by just typing the date table, and then we get all of the records from this table. We can click the little magnifying glass here if we want to bring that out into a more detailed view. So basically, the debugger lets us dive into the code, understand what's going on in terms of filter contexts, row contexts, evaluating sub-expressions, to better figure out how our code works. So yeah, and this the
Holy
improvements
cow!
that we,
So hang on one second. I just want to recap what I just saw. So you ran a query in Power BI and you returned the results, right? You had Performance Analyzer on, so you copied the DAX query that was executed. You then went over to Tabular Editor 3. You pasted in, got the same results, but then you were able to look at a singular value that was being generated and walk back through what happened in DAX and troubleshoot any potential issues that you might have.
Yeah.
Did I just see that? Is that what happened?
Yes, that is absolutely what happened. And this is, I mean, yeah, this is a huge time saver when you're trying to debug your DAX code and figure out what's going on in your calculations.
Oh my gosh, that is just so. That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many weeks I've spent doing that. That is amazing. And because it's not just like, oh, your net value, it's the one value on that one filter context that could be an issue. Ugh.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a really powerful tool because the first step, of course, is that, based on the cell that you're debugging, it figures out, okay, what is the filter context for that cell, and it gathers that information based on the DAX query that's being executed. But then as you step into the code, you can actually, see all of the sub expressions, variables, everything that's in the code basically, and also, any arbitrary calculation that you want to have executed in that same context. You can just type the expression here and you get the result right away. So if you wanted to replicate this without Tabular Editor, you'd have to spend a lot of time editing code manually in tools like DAX Studio, for example, to paste in the filter context, and then maybe you wanted to go look at a different cell, and then you had to modify the filter context or remove some of the filters. That's also something you can just do by enabling or disabling the check marks here to modify the filter. So it's a really, really powerful tool. I actually did a more in-depth video about the debugger a while ago together with Reed Havens. So if you want to learn more about it, you can just, I think you can just browse YouTube for Tabular Editor 3 debugger or something like that. And then there's a 1 hour, 20-minute video somewhere.
Oh, this is fantastic. And that actually is one of the questions that just popped up in the channel. Like, how do you learn more about this? And if I had a Hey Alex, I'd say Hey Alex, but Alex doesn't watch my live streams like that. So
on our documentation site, there's also a section for the DAX debugger. And in fact, here you'll find the video that I did with Reed Havens. And here you can also find more details about it, learn about the various shortcuts you can use, and learn how you can invoke the debugger. So on this animation, I'm invoking it through the pivot grid, which is another feature of Tabular Editor. So instead of actually having a DAX query that you're debugging into, you can just arrange some measures and some fields in a pivot table, and then right-click on the cell that contains the value that you want to debug, and then you're golden. So yeah, great feature. I strongly urge people to look into it. Anyone who's ever struggled with getting a DAX calculation to return the right result, which I think is basically every person in the world who's ever written DAX code.
Right.
So yeah, for sure.
This is incredible, man. Wow. I mean, so right here you demonstrated why every enterprise should be buying Tabular Editor 3 for every one of their enterprise developers, right? I mean, if you have complex dynamic row-level security, you have to have this to troubleshoot why Jim can't see the new Coca-Cola sales order that came through, right? Like,
yes. Yeah.
Figuring out why Jim can't see that order when you have hundreds of millions of clients and orders and whatnot is an abysmal process to try and sort out. This looks like it would just make it just so easy to run through that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah, and by the way, going back to Juan's question earlier about the XMLA endpoint, you should be aware that if you are connecting to the Power BI XMLA endpoint, there's actually a feature here that lets you open a model in read-only mode. Meaning this way, when you do that, you can still run the DAX debugger and you can still debug all your expressions, but you don't run the risk of accidentally changing something in the model and then flagging it as we said, as a data set that can no longer be downloaded as a PBIX file. So if you have data sets in production or whatever, and you want to make sure that you do not make any changes to these data sets, you just want to access them for read-only purposes, for DAX debugging, and then make sure that you use this feature here.
That's incredible. Does that reset for the refresh? Like if you want to log in and refresh, does that reset? Do you know or not?
That's a good question, actually. I'll need to test that because I'm not sure if running a refresh through an external tool on a data set will flag that data set as being no longer downloadable. So, I mean, in my opinion, it shouldn't flag it as not downloadable, since you can also refresh a data set through SSMS,
right.
And if you do that, you should still be able to download it as a PBIX. So I think, but yeah, I'll have to test it to make sure. But I think that running it in read refresh only mode should also let you still be able to download it. But yeah, I'll have to test that to make sure, because that's an interesting scenario that I didn't consider previously. But I guarantee you that if you open it in read-only mode, then you'll still be able to download it as a PBIX, and you can still use the debugger as I just showed here.
That's phenomenal. That's incredible. Well, and that honestly, that just goes to show there's nobody who knows all of the stuff, right? Like,
exactly.
I mean, if you think about like Power BI ecosystem, I don't know how many hundreds of developers they have currently working on it, and I don't know how many thousands of developers have worked on it over the course of the years, right? But knowing how every little bit of code works with thousands of people contributing to a code base is virtually impossible. So what you just described is super important. Know what the tools do, right? But then when you encounter an edge case that you haven't played with before, experiment and test, and do so in a way that's not going to screw up your enterprise content. Oh, and we have Adam Saxton joining the...
Hey, Adam.
What's going on, Adam? My first super chat. Hey, thank you. Yeah, I was very proud. I sent to Adam. I just got monetized, and so I can now do those things. And I collected 86 cents. I was like, woo! Now we're
nice.
Now we're making money.
Awesome. Yeah, so definitely check out the debugger. I mean, it's also available in the free 30-day trial. It's a fully functional trial of Tabular Editor 3. So go ahead and play with it a little bit. I mean, in my opinion, it's worth every penny of that feature alone is worth every penny of Tabular Editor 3. But then, of course, we have a lot of other features as well. But this is just the one that I wanted to highlight.
No, I mean, this is just fantastic, right? Like, I have not... I didn't see Reed's thing, so I apologize to both you and Reed. But I didn't see him on my live stream either, so, you know, fair enough, right? This is fantastic. So, you know, thank you for... You had something else you wanted to show us. What's the next thing you wanted to go into?
Yeah, so the scripting thing, we also talked about it briefly when we touched on the master model pattern. It's also a very, very nice feature to know about and to make sure that you're utilizing fully in an enterprise setting, making sure that you are sharing the useful scripts that you have among the developers and the team. It can just, you know, even though Tabular Editor in itself is a huge productivity booster, the scripting feature just takes that to the next level, basically. And you should be aware that scripting is also possible in the open source version, Tabular Editor 2, and you can even reuse scripts across both Tabular Editor 2 and 3. So even if you have some team members who are not using Tabular Editor 3, you can still utilize this feature and benefit a lot from it.
So one of my favorite scripts that you can run in Tabular Editor 2 that I use all the time, Michael Kowalski wrote, where basically it dumps all of the measure descriptions or field descriptions out into an Excel file. You can then take that Excel file and give that to someone who's good at writing and good at the English and words putting together type stuff, and they can write out what these descriptions are, and they can add in the appropriate context, and then they send you an Excel file back, and as long as they didn't screw up the format, you just import the file and you have great formatted descriptions inside your model. That's just brilliant, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly the kind of thing you can use scripts for. Now, some of the improvements that we have in Tabular Editor 3 is that the IntelliSense-like features that appear as you type your C# code has been much improved. So basically, in Tabular Editor 3, we've switched to using something called the Roslyn C# compiler, which is the same C# compiler that Visual Studio uses when you're writing code in Visual Studio. So that means we have now this type of autocomplete and actually this is what I was looking for, the export properties. That's the function that Michael Kowalski uses in the script, which lets you save all descriptions and so on to a file, which you can then later import. And the cool thing here is we have now the IntelliSense, which helps you with the tooltips and shows you the function parameters and so on when you're calling this function. So this is basically a full-fledged IDE for creating these types of scripts. And now, what I usually like to show when I'm presenting in Tabular Editor is we also have a collection of scripts on our websites, which are some of the most common scripts that you'll typically run into. My favorite is actually the first two scripts that we have here. There's this one. If we just copy it over to Tabular Editor, this is the script that basically lets you create measures from columns. It's a best practice, especially when creating enterprise models, to always have explicit measures in your model. So not just relying on numerical columns that users should drag into the matrix to have them aggregated, but actually hiding the numeric column and then creating an explicit measure. And maybe it's just a sum or other simple aggregation of the numeric column, but it's just important from a usability perspective to always have the explicit measures created in the model. And now the thing about that is it gets old pretty fast if you're working on a very broad fact table with 50 columns. If you have to create just a simple sum measure for each of these columns one by one. So that's an obvious candidate for something that could be automated, which is what this script here does. So in fact, let me demonstrate this by just, and this is also, this demo actually has two parts, in that the first part is the scripting, of course, but the other part of this demo is to also show you how quickly you can create a model from scratch with Tabular Editor. So without further ado, let me create a new model. We hit OK. We choose analysis services as our local instance of analysis services as our workspace database. And then we import some tables. And I'm just clicking through these steps relatively quickly. As you can tell, I've done this demo a couple of times before. But this is just to show you that in just a matter of minutes, if you have these scripts, you can actually create a full-fledged enterprise model using Tabular Editor. So here is my SQL Server data warehouse that I'm going to import some tables from. So let's go with internet sales, date, customer, and some products. So we're just going with these 6 tables for now. So now we have the tables. Let's clean up the names a little bit. Here's another nice feature, the batch rename, so we can get rid of the dim prefix of all of these tables at once. Let's clean this up a little bit as well. Best practice is to have friendly names on your tables. category and product subcategory. Let's create the relationships. We do that by using the diagram feature, drag in all of the tables, and then, create relationships between customer, between, let's see, we have product here somewhere. We have our date. But we can probably tell I've done this a few times before. I sort of know the AdventureWorks model
by heart.
Yeah, exactly. So here we go. So now we've created the relationships. Let's just auto-arrange so we get this nice snowflake diagram here that looks good. Don't need this diagram anymore. We hit save. So here's this, and this is actually another enterprise feature when you're working in a team environment. And you want to have multiple developers being able to work on the same model at the same time. What you want to do is you want to use Tabular Editor's database.json format when saving the model metadata to disk, because this format is where we basically split up the model.bim file, the JSON file, into several smaller files, one file for each table, one file for each measure within the tables, and so on. Which makes it much better suited for version control integration. So when you want to integrate your model metadata into a version control like Git, then using this format will just cause, you won't have to deal with merge conflicts and so on, and just in general make it easier for multiple developers to work in parallel on the same model. So this is what I'm going to do here as well, and we'll just put this somewhere on the desktop. We'll just call it Wagner. And here we go. So now we have this nice folder structure, and don't mind my busy desktop here. But now you can see here we have the Chris Wagner model, and in this you'll see we have one folder for each of the tables. Within each table, we will have one folder for each, or one file for each column, for each partition. And as we create the measures, they'll also appear here. So if you're using something like Git, it'll be much easier to track changes, like which particular object was changed, when, and by who. And also, when two or more developers are working on the same model, if they're working on different parts of the model, so say I'm working on internet sales, my colleague may be working on a different fact table, maybe a different business area within the same model, then we'll be physically touching different files of the model instead of all making our changes to the same file. So we can just rely on Git to merge these changes for us, pick up the merged version of the model, and then deploy it using Tabular Editor. Yeah. So that's also a very nice thing for enterprises to use.
This is such a big deal, and if you're, I would understand why, if you were in an enterprise, you weren't doing this, because if you were using SSDT, it didn't have this as an option. And if you've been building models for a long time, you've never even thought about storing data outside of the BIM structure. Like, I get it, but it's always been a challenge. Like, check out, bring stuff together, dealing with merge conflicts was impossible before. Now this is something that makes it very, very easy. Please make sure you set this stuff up so that you're separating these things out, and it becomes super easy to have a team of engineers all working on one model, contributing, checking code in, rolling code back. Like,
yes,
like that was impossible. Like, impossible to roll something back. You just had to like unscrew up whatever was screwed up, right? Yeah. Now you can actually just do a rollback, which means you can actually have legit DevOps pipelines that automatically deploy your models, run a test script against it, validate that it's right, and let it go. Or fail, roll it back, and then like you don't have to like go before the audit board about why your sales numbers were off. And
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So and there's actually a lot of stuff going on here, because you may have noticed when I created this new model, I used this approach with the Workspace database, and this is also a recommended approach in enterprise settings, where each developer, as they're working on the model, they should basically spin up or basically what the workspace does is it actually deploys the model as a database if I'm on analysis services, or if I point it to the Power BI endpoint, it'll deploy a data set. And this will be my personal data set that I'm working on as I'm making changes to the model, because this allows me to test my code with actual data that I'm loading into the model as I'm developing. But at the same time, whenever I hit save, I want to save the metadata of the model back to the file or folder structure that I specified initially. So since I did that now, and I've already imported some tables, you can see initially when I import the tables, they'll be empty. There's no data in here because I didn't refresh the data. So unlike Power BI Desktop that loads the data immediately as you import the tables, in Tabular Editor, we expect you to actually do this when you're ready to load the data, because maybe you want to fix some other stuff before you start loading data into the model. And
God
in this
bless
case,
you, Daniel Otykier. God bless you.
Yeah, and the same thing applies to the relationships that we created manually a moment ago. So I don't want to guess what your relationship should be like Power BI Desktop does. I assume that you, as a professional developer, knows how you want to structure your model and how you want to apply your relationship. So we don't want to make any assumptions on your behalf, and we'll leave this stuff to you as the data modeler.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, Hermans has a question about the possibility of being able to peek in on a measure. So if you're just looking at the measure, being able to see the definition behind that, like, what's is that a future something that we might have someday?
So, Herman, if you just give me 2 minutes, I'll show you that in the demo as well, because we actually have a peak definition feature in our DAX editor. So I'll just have to create some measures first in this model, and then I can show it to you.
Well, then, yes.
So
today we'll do that.
Yeah, so as we'll continue to work on this model, but I just want to make sure that I have some data as well, so I can test my measures and my logic and so on. So I'll start a refresh of this model. So we'll run this full refresh, and this will actually happen in the background. So okay, so now in this case it's not that impressive because it only takes a fraction of a second to complete. But my point here is that the refresh runs in the background. So even if it had taken a couple of minutes to complete the refresh, I could still keep working on my model, and I could add measures and change format strings and all of the stuff. It still works. The only thing I can't do is I won't be able to save changes to the database in analysis services, because the database is currently being refreshed. I would still be able to save the changes I made to my local disk. To the metadata, but I would have to push the save button again once the refresh completes, in order to make sure that the new measures or whatever I created gets pushed to analysis services. But the point is, the refresh runs asynchronously in the background, so I can keep working as I'm waiting for the refresh to complete. That's also a pretty neat feature to know about. And now you can see we have the data loaded into the tables here. So now I finally get to the point where I wanted to run this script that we copied earlier. So instead of creating an explicit measure for discount amount, for extended amount, for freight, and so on, we're just going to multi-select the columns on which we want to create our measures. So I think we're just going to go with these 5 columns, and then we're going to run the script. And you can see now 2 things happen. So first of all, the script has hidden these columns. You can tell by the font being in gray. So these columns are now hidden and not visible to the end users. And at the same time, we got the new measures here, which are just simple sum measures. So imagine you had a fact table with 50 such columns. Then this one script has just saved you, I don't know, maybe an hour of work or so. So
right, for just the sum, right?
Yeah,
just
exactly.
The simple sum of that you wasted years of my life on. So yes, this is incredible. Incredible.
And by the way,
young whippersnappers don't know what it was like.
Tabular Editor has full undo redo support. So if you make a mistake on your data model along the way, you can undo anytime, unlike other tools. Not going to put any names since we have Adam Saxton here. But But this undo redo functionality even works with the scripts. So if you modified the script and you made a mistake somewhere and you see the script did the wrong thing, well, then you just hit one button and then you undo whatever the script just did to your model.
I gotta get that. Whoa, what the French toast there? I don't have a button for it, but I got a t-shirt on. Wow. Are you kidding me? So like if someone was asking, like, I don't know much about like scripting and I want to start working with scripting and I'd start to follow your templates that you have out there and I totally mess up my model. I'm not just completely effed. I can just reverse the script.
Control set, that's your friend. Yep.
Wow.
So the next script I just quickly want to show here before we run out of time is a very similar script. Actually, it just for purposes of creating, different flavors of the same calculation, like time intelligence type calculations where you have year to date, year over year, and so on. Mm-hmm. This is what this script does. Hang on, let me just reset my windows here. That's the wrong C# script. Here we go. So I'm pasting this in here. So this script is basically just going, so for each measure that I selected, it's going to create a year-to-date flavor of that measure, a previous year, year over year, and so forth. So I just want to make sure I have the right date column here, because in AdventureWorks, they named the date time column something as awful as full date alternate key. So I'm just going to rename this to date. And then instead of actually running the script, let me just show a different feature here. So I'm going to save this script as something called a macro. And we're going to name this in your honor, Chris Wagner, create time intel measures. And I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to close the script, forget all about it. Now we have the script saved as a reusable macro inside of Tabular Editor. You can view it here in the macros window. You can share these macros with your team members. And the cool thing about these macros are that they are integrated into the right-click menu of Tabular Editor. So now we see Chris Wagner here in the menu, and we see the create time intel measures macro here. So when I now click on this, it will actually run the script. So we do just that, and boom, just like that, we now have, I don't know, some 35 measures or so in the model with all of these different flavors of time intelligence calculations in them.
Wow.
And once again, we can undo, we can redo. It just works.
Now you're showing off.
Yeah, I know I am. That's the whole purpose of this session, right? So getting back to Hemant's question. So let's say you have an expression such as this one, and there's some calculation here, and you're referencing another measure, and you forgot what the definition of this particular measure was. We now have this peak definition feature here where you can like get an editor inside the editor that shows you what the other measure looks like. So I hope that answers your question, Hemant. We are considering having more levels, so being able to get an editor inside an editor. Yeah, exactly. That doesn't work right now, but if there's a demand for it, then we can absolutely make it work.
Like Russian nesting measures and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But alternatively, I'd just like to highlight another feature where, instead of looking just at a single measure at a time, we have this script DAX feature where you can basically bring all of your measures or a subset of measures into a single script, a single document, and then have all of the DAX code in a single place. Because this way you make it easier to navigate between if you're working on...
Whoa. Go back. That was too fast. I missed it. What happened there? What did you just do?
This is the DAX script feature, and that's actually also a quite underutilized feature of Tabular Editor, where you can basically just select a bunch of objects like measures, calculated columns, calculation items, and then you right-click and choose the script DAX option. You can also, if you want to do it for everything in your model at once, that's also possible. And then it just goes ahead and generates a script for you that contains all of the logic. So I don't know, Chris, if you're old enough to remember multidimensional models and MDX, where we actually typed all of our MDX measures in a single document. This is the same thing, but for DAX code. So
Oh
this is
my
also yet another useful enterprise feature for for real life enterprise models.
So if I've got a whole mess of models and I'm trying to validate that they were all written appropriately, I could, instead of like having to like run through each one, or wow.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, assuming you have the same set of tables and columns and so on across different models, you can copy paste the script, move it over to a different model, run it, and get the same measures created. And not just not just the DAX expressions, but also stuff like format strings. You can set a description in here. Say this is the sales amount year calculation, and then when you apply this to the model, it'll be assigned to that. So let's see, that was this one here, right? So here we have the oops. Let me expand this a little bit. Where is my? There it is. So sales amount year-over-year percentage. Now you see we have this description applied to this measure. So yeah, really useful feature if you're working with complex DAX logic spread across multiple different objects.
This is fantastic. This is so this is absolutely great, and I'm terribly sorry. I got lost and wrapped up in time. We are at time that I could watch this like all night long, but I understand it's like 1 or 2 in the morning where you're at, Daniel. So I unfortunately have to thank you so much for staying up late and for your years and years of blood, sweat, and tears of building out and working inside Tabular Editor, and for providing this for us as an enterprise. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for everyone who's dialed in to watch this conversation go on. I really appreciate it. Next week, you can join me and Daniel. Apparently Daniel's going to be at the Chicago Insights Data Insights Summit. But this live stream will be live in Chicago. After the first day of the summit, we'll be recapping. I've got Jaron, I've got Alex. We're going to be recapping all of the highlights of the Data Insights Summit. You got to join in and check it out. All right. So Daniel, once again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. And thank you guys all so much. You guys all have a great day. Peace.